The prioritization is really about how do we keep critical ecosystems and the values within those ecosystems, those carbon sinks, those critical habitat areas, the water sources for humans and everything else that's living. How do we keep those things intact? That's priority number one is, and that's where the prioritization comes in. We have to go to those places first and do the kinds of restorative treatments that actually keep those places functioning.
Welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Allison Wolff, CEO and founder of Vibrant Planet. Now, Vibrant Planet are an innovative climate tech company really committed to strategically mitigating wildfire risk and using kind of AI and innovation and technology to, really help protect the planet and to create, I suppose, climate resilience. So it's a fascinating business. Allison, I'm super glad to that you've given your time to come on today. It's really looking forward to the discussion with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it as well.
So, interesting with your background. Let's take it back a little bit, right? I suppose as you sit here today, what's really helped kind of, I suppose, shape your journey, when you consider your background?
So I think about a lot of my career being about movement building and sort of transformative work from early days at Netflix when we were a weird little DVD rental business, and then really helping craft the vision for what would be possible when fiber optic cable was laid and we could actually all stream and fast forward and rewind movies and have millions of people watching movies at once, to working with Google to build Google Green. And that was really the intention, was to document how Google became such a sustainable company across its food systems, its transportation for employees, its buildings, its energy use, and its data center efficiency in order to get other people to replicate what they were doing, to get other companies to be inspired and realize that some of those things were possible. To sort of one-upping what happened at Google when I went over to Facebook and helped launch the Open Compute project and helped to grow it to 300 companies. And it was essentially a space race to build the most efficient data center, and getting some of the large companies to really compete on who can have the most efficient data center. And then the deal was you had to open source how you did it. So those kinds of things, just creating a game-changing, transformative playing ground that really made a difference in data center efficiency, and then did similar work in renewable energy, helping to create large renewable energy buys going into coal-based states with 30 companies and bringing philanthropy, jobs, and then adding green energy to the grid, and thereby greening the American grid in coal-based states. So anyway, so that's been a lot of my career. And in a way now what we're doing at Vibrant Planet is similar, where we're really transforming the way land management and land use happens by making visible what's been invisible. And a lot of that is putting a value on nature.
Yeah, no, great. Tell me though, tell me a little bit about that sustainable journey for you, right? Because you said you were Netflix, and then, when it came to, working with Google Green and then the kind of data center kind of innovation, were you seeking out those opportunities in the climate space? Or I suppose just thinking more about that mission of the why as it relates to the kind of climate, and when that really resonated with you.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, since I was a kid, been really tied to nature. I grew up in Colorado and spent a lot of time camping and backpacking and sitting in the middle of rivers and just sort of watching them go by. And so I've always had an affinity for nature and always have been sort of a big outdoor athlete my whole life. And just starting to see the change and the impact humanity has had through land use, and starting to learn more and more about, we've got 80,000 chemicals in the United States that have never been tested that are just all over in our atmosphere. We're seeing all the news now about PCBs and everything, right? Plastics and up to the tippy top of the Himalayas in our salt, in our water, in our fish, right? So anyway, started to really dig into those issues early on in my life, and I had the opportunity to really be early in working with Silicon Valley on how do they tilt those big global platforms towards good. And so that was really my job for 20 years to really help think about from a fundamental how do we operate perspective, how to bring sustainability into every part of the company, and then how to tell the story. So that was really my career for a very long time. And now, built a public benefit corp that at its core, it's less sort of off to the side. It's for us, it's core to the business, and that's really fun for me to actually build something now that inherently does good.
Yeah, I mean, were you always an entrepreneur at heart? That when you look back and we look back 20 years, were you always going to be a founder, CEO of an early stage company, or leading your own company?
I never stated that I would do that, but I was sort of an entrepreneur inside companies, I guess you could say. And it's funny later when I worked at some of the bigger companies, you'd find your people, you'd find other zealots that were seeing the same things, seeing opportunities to leverage technology for public good, and just continuously saw opportunities to sort of go for it. It's really just having the guts and the confidence to name issues and then work to solve them. So have sort of been doing that by default since the earliest days of my career.
Yeah, you seem to strike me as, when you name the issue, it doesn't matter if you've got any particular competence in an area, you seem to be pretty quick at moving into spaces and learning what needs to be learned. And i.e., you don't let the limitations of what you know stop you from kind of moving forward with trying to solve a problem, it seems, looking at your career.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. I'm definitely a self-starter and a questioner. I think curiosity is one of my favorite human traits, and I'm a very curious person to try to figure out why is this happening? Why would we make this choice? And why can't we change it? So have sort of done that my whole career, and we need a lot of us doing that right now because we humans have made a lot of silly decisions. And I think a lot of this stuff, especially with sustainability, nobody's really figured it out. So you just have to be a curious person and a fixer. And I think, the more of us that are sort of asking the hard questions and working to transform different little pieces of how we operate as humans, as companies, is really important right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about the Vibrant Planet, how it came about, and I suppose, what the motivation was, or what really inspired you to set the company up.
Yeah, so a lot of my career in Silicon Valley was focused on data center efficiency and then renewable energy, like really building movements around those two things and ultimately working to green the grid. And some of those efforts really did help tip it created the tipping point where fossil fuels became more expensive than renewable energy. And sure, we're still struggling, we're still moving way too slow on that transformation, but I did feel like I was a little tiny part of helping the energy transition. I have been very, very worried about biodiversity loss since the early 2000s, and just seeing more and more of that issue. We've lost somewhere between 50 and 70% of our insect population. We've fried half of the phytoplankton in the oceans that produce half of oxygen on Earth over the last few decades with climate change and ocean acidification. We're losing bird populations like shorebirds, where we've lost 50% of shorebirds and we'll lose 50% again in the next few years. And then, you know, pretty soon they'll go extinct, and they're really important to ecosystems. So I've been really worried about these kinds of issues and water impacts. And I got the opportunity to work with Paul Hawken, who's a prolific author and sort of one of the fathers of the environmental movement and climate visioning. for solutions. And he wrote a book called Drawdown and created a organization called Drawdown as well. He's now got a new book called Regeneration. But through the work with Drawdown, really started to understand the power of land-based climate solutions and really bought into Paul's vision for a new goal on climate change, which is drawdown. So the point at which the carbon emissions peak and we're actually seeing them decline. And part of the decline is pulling the carbon and other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. So obviously we have machines that lots of investment is going into for direct carbon capture. Those are a long way away from making a big difference, and they use a lot of energy to work. So it's a little bit of a downward cycle until the grid changes completely, right? What I learned is that the 16 land-based solutions in drawdown in combination, so things like silviculture and regenerative agriculture, kelp farming in oceans, together can pull down all the emissions that we've ever emitted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And that's all land use and land management related. And so I started to really get religion on that several years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, in helping to launch Drawdown, and had thought I would land after my Silicon Valley career in a regenerative ag tech company, or potentially start one. I was thinking about starting one. As I was talking to people, trying to figure out where I wanted to land, I was doing some work for an impact investor. I did a lot of work for Silicon Valley founders on impact investing and sort of legacy strategy. And one of them lived in the Tahoe area and wanted to build sort of like a Rocky Mountain Institute type thing in Tahoe. Tahoe doesn't have a center of intellect like some of the other ski areas have. And so started to explore what could a new climate center do that would be unique. And while I was exploring that, talking to locals and global leaders like Catherine Hayhoe and Michael Mann on what's needed in the world, and also Amory Levins, who leads Rocky Mountain Institute, we had the Paradise, California fire, and then we had the Carr Fire, which was the worst fire in California to date. And then Australia burned beyond anyone, beyond what anyone could have ever imagined that year. So started to dig into fire. All anyone would talk about locally in the Tahoe area was fire and what the future looks like. Talked to climate scientists as well about the intersection of climate change and land management, and really started to understand the science and the land management issue, and started to realize that landing in regenerative ag was probably not my best use, and that all agriculture is at risk if we don't deal with this severe wildfire problem. So just dug deep into that rat hole to understand, why is it so bad? What can we do about it? And started to learn, like, we actually really can bend the curve on this severe wildfire issue that we're experiencing worldwide, and we need to hurry up. And hurrying up requires technology. Coming into the space, I saw, 2, 5, 10-year planning processes that often ended in litigation, lots of conflict, lack of trust between different people that needed to collaborate on planning, and the whole system was broken and had not moved to the internet yet. I mean, it was just incredible to me. So just saw a huge opportunity to apply technology to support what are inherently collaborative planning processes to deal with wildfire resilience, and then to basically protect biodiversity, water sources, carbon sinks, those kinds of things.
Amazing. And tell me a little bit about the bending of the curve and how you bend the curve. Because I've always, just seen some of these events that have happened, and I'm just generally just felt very hopeless about it, really, to be honest. Like, is there much that can be done to alleviate this? And talking with you, I kind of got inspired that there's solutions out there.
It's really possible. I mean, the science shows us, and there's lots of experimental forests that have proven out that we can actually get a more resilient forest structure back intact, and that those forest structures can make it through fire. They actually want more fire, which I can get into, and then they'll help us draw down carbon. So to understand that statement, you have to understand a little bit of land use over the last several hundred years. In the Western US, where we've started our work, we essentially played out the Lorax, the children's book where they cut all the trees down. So we literally cut all the trees down. There's only 7% old growth in the Western United States, which is really hard to imagine. I mean, it's covered in trees. But I mean, picture a moonscape. That's how it was 150, 200 years ago. As pioneers moved west, we cut everything down and we built railroads, mines, and towns. Everything was made of wood, and the whole American economy was based on wood. And so we cut down the giants, and then after that, everything grew back at once. So once we realized that that was a mistake, there was a true lack of management, and so we had all these trees grow all at once. And so we've basically across the West got a bunch of 150-year-old teenagers, and they grew back too close together. We've transformed what was sort of a clump and gap structure where you'd have meadows that were, beaver were all over. We had 600 million beaver in the Western US. There's very few today. But we had these sort of wetlands interconnected with spread out forest for the most part. And there's history of John Muir riding 3 horses wide through the Sierra Nevada forest. You can't even walk in the forest where I live now. They're so tightly packed, and they're sickly, right? There's sometimes 2 to 10 times the number of trees, and they're fighting for water, and that water is dwindling with climate change. So we've really created this sort of unresilient, very unnatural forest structure. And that's all human caused. And then you add, of course, human caused climate change to the mix, and you've got um, all these tightly packed trees that are too close together. And then we've controlled fire for 130 years. We've had 100% fire suppression policy. So you only hear about like 2% of fires that get out of control. There's thousands and thousands of fires all the time that we put out, from lightning storms, from cigarette butts, campfires, barbecues, you name it. Um, the history of this land is that it used to burn every 5 to 100 years. So like top of the Rocky Mountains, severe fire every 100 years. That was really good for like aspen stands. In the Sierra Nevada where I live, we had fire roll through every 5 to 15 years, and fire was playing this really important role of cleaning up downed timber and branches and leaves, and it's how these forests regenerate. So pine cones are little round balls of fire, right? They catch on fire. They're covered in sap by design. So they roll around and they clean the forest floor so that the mother tree can plant her seeds. And so we've basically arrested all of beneficial fire that enables these ecosystems, which are 53% of land on Earth, by the way, are fire adapted. So they evolved with fire. And we've completely stopped fire in the ecosystems. And so the systems are failing because of it. And they're burning really severely because fire hasn't played the role it's played for 20,000 years of getting the right number of trees per acre, cleaning the forest floor of all the kindling. Now we've got all this kindling on the forest floor that makes fires go really big. And so now we're seeing these really severe catastrophic fires because there's so much fuel in the forest and tightly packed trees that a fire that would normally be regenerative and stay on the ground basically explodes the forest. It travels up on ladder fuels to the canopy, and then they're moving at speeds we can't even evacuate people in time. So we've only seen the very tip of the iceberg on fire. Unfortunately, the future is very, very bleak. But the hope is that, and the science shows us that if we can move fast enough, we can get more of a historically appropriate number of trees per acre, get more of that clump and gap structure, reintroduce species like beaver that dam up rivers and create sort of marshy wetlands, which is what most of the West looked like, and create refugia for fire as well. So we can actually sort of reconstruct what was historically appropriate, and then we can also foster climate resilient forests that will make it in the future. But it's a ton of work, and so where the technology piece comes in, and what our platform does, is now it's all about prioritization. So it's what do we do where in that's ecologically appropriate in different contexts, and what do we do in what sequence? Because now the sequencing is really critical. There's places that are in very, very high danger both communities and ecosystems. So where we've got, biodiversity hotspots, carbon sinks, old growth, the remaining old growth, critical threatened and endangered species like spotted owl and martin and others like them. And so we have to act in the right order of priority. And that's what our system does is it helps figure out, it maps risk, it maps tree level data of vegetation, but also all of the different critical species, water sources, carbon sinks, to help map risk to not just built infrastructure, which is what humans have done in the past, is solely protect built infrastructure, but it's mapping the values of nature as well to help
How does
us
it do
actually put
that?
those on the
How does
table.
it, I mean, how quickly and how efficient is it at mapping that level of data in order for you, therefore, to actually work out what we're going to focus on?
Yeah, so one of the things we focused on for 3 years is to build, we're basically an applied AI company. So like some of the big companies that are valued at, tens of billions of dollars, a lot of them, like ChatGPT helps you with generative AI. You can put anything in and it's the AI is trained on all the text in the world, right? And we're seeing all kinds of interesting things about copyright issues and all of that, right? But they've trained their algorithm on text, and then it's relatively smart now and can develop a picture, or it can write a report for you based on what it has learned. So we're using the same kind of technology, feeding lots and lots of imagery. The foundation of our imagery is lidar. Lidar is literally a laser that is usually flown from planes. There's some drone-based lidar, but it basically takes a 3D image of forest and vegetation structure down to like the leaf and needle level, and then key parameters like topography and all kinds of things. And so we build a 3D. We use that lidar to build basically a 3D twin of vegetation. And then we can refurbish lidar that's stale. Lidar is a picture in time, right? It's whenever the plane flew over. Gets stale really quickly now with drought-driven disease and fire. So we can refurbish old lidar with satellite imagery, and there's in the U.S. 2D imagery from the Department of Agriculture that we use to basically recreate that 3D vegetation model. And then where LiDAR hasn't been flown, we can fill gaps in using the same technology, applying our algorithm to 2D satellite and Department of Ag imagery to create that 3D representation. And then we map to that threatened and endangered species, other key species like beaver that aren't on the threatened and endangered list, but have these huge outsized benefits when they are in ecosystems in ecologically appropriate areas. Um, we map connectivity corridors, all kinds of things related to biodiversity, water, how water moves through forests. 70% of water that is available for humans to drink originates in forests and is moving through forests. And so the water forest connection is really critical. And then obviously forests are storing about a third of the carbon that we emit every year. And some of the forests in the West, like coastal forests in the Pacific Northwest, are storing as much carbon as tropical rainforests like the Amazon. So they're really, really important for human survival. So we're able to basically map all those values in addition to the built infrastructure values, which we have real values, right? Like for real estate. And all of that is normalized in the system. That enables really rich scenario planning and forecasting of if we do this, then what? In terms of reduced fire severity, reduced fire probability projected 10 to 30 years out, and also ecosystem enhancements. If we do this treatment, if we drop beaver back into this area, what can we expect in terms of carbon, water, biodiversity benefit? In what time frame? And how do we account for that, right? So we're actually putting that accounting in the system to help people make better decisions, not just to protect built infrastructure, but to also protect some of the key nature values that are our life support systems.
It sounds like that is probably the ecological kind of benefits is more of a longer term kind of roadmap, is it, in terms of how things can kind of improve. So you've got this risk mitigation, which is like dealing with some of the kind of real kind of critical risks here and now, and then you have a kind of longer term goal to kind of restore the land.
That's right. They're kind of both happening at the same time. So as we get a more historically appropriate and future appropriate number of trees per acre and forest structure, we're inherently both reducing wildfire risk because there's less fuels to burn. And the forest, remember, wants fire, right? It wants regenerative fire. And so we're really restoring that. We're creating the conditions where we can restore a beneficial fire regime. That's really what we're doing. And at the same time, having less trees per acre helps some of the pine species fend off bark beetle, right? Like right now, the way they fend off bark beetle is they create a chemical that the bark beetle can't handle. But when they're fighting, when they don't have enough water, because there's 10 trees per acre, there's 10x the trees per acre, and they're fighting for resources, they can't make enough of the antidote. So by thinning out the forest, we're also fixing some of the bark beetle problem that's killing billions of trees. We're also keeping spotted owl habitat in place by treating around owl nests. So the fire risk and the ecosystem services benefit are sort of go hand in hand, and we truly bridge sort of the fire mitigation and nature enhancement world. It's kind of all one thing. But you're right in that the prioritization is really about how do we keep critical ecosystems and the values within those ecosystems, those carbon sinks, those critical habitat areas, the water sources for humans and everything else that's living. How do we keep those things intact? That's priority number one and that's where the prioritization comes in. We have to go to those places first and do the kinds of restorative treatments that actually keep those places functioning and not exploding in fire. And the treatments, when I say treatments, just to explain that, it's everything from like young people going out and hand limbing so that to reduce ladder fuels from the ground, like limbing up trees, like you do in your yard for defensible space, to mastication, where you go in like with a giant lawnmower and chew up brush that shouldn't be 6 feet tall. Like if fire had been allowed to roll through, that brush wouldn't be there at all, or it would be much, much less or much shorter. So sometimes we go in with this kind of lawnmower thing and masticate. Where it's possible, we can put prescribed fire, we can do controlled burns now. It's just that a lot of the forest is so overgrown that can create a ton of smoke. People don't like smoke, and sometimes it's not safe because the conditions are such that good fire can't really do its job. So we sometimes do mechanical work to prepare the forest for beneficial fire. But really, over time, we hope that once we do mechanical thins, we're mostly managing land with fire, which is what tribes did for 20,000 years. I mean, throughout the Western US, there's evidence of, basically the equivalent of prescribed burns that, was called cultural fire for thousands of years. And that's true. You hear about the Aboriginal fire in Australia. Of course, throughout South America, there's a lot of dry forests in Chile and other places. And a long, long ago in Europe, same thing.
So tell me what's the ambition of the company? Like, how much of an impact do you foresee being able to kind of make over the next 5 to 10 years?
So the combination of scaling up our system to work with a lot of the big land management agencies here in the US, we're deployed in about 34 million acres across 5 states in the United States, and we're hoping to scale that up. Our system's now available across all the Western states. As we work with Forest Service, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, state parks, national parks, we work with CAL FIRE in California, a really important agency for managing, risk mitigation for fire. Um, as we scale up and then also work with utilities, we're starting to have a really big utility business where utilities have a concerted interest in reducing liability in the fuel bed um, in on their land, but also beyond their land. So they're actually starting to cooperate with Forest Service and BLM to reduce fuels because they're worried about starting fires when their lines are running through Forest Service or BLM land. And they're also worried about receiving fire as really big landowners and infrastructure owners, right? And so they're starting to pitch in. So as we bring this kind of cooperative risk reduction, all the big land managers, which includes utilities, together, we feel like within the next 5 to 10 years, working at scale, we can hit all the really high priority areas in the Western US, which we're doing now. Some of the most high severity fire areas, the Forest Service threw at us. And so we've got state, private, tribal, and Forest Service managers actively working on our system right now across all these 5 states. So that will turn into, in the next 5 years, lots and lots of treatment work that happens so that those forests will hopefully not burn severely and those places stay intact. And then we'll go to the next high priority areas and the next high priority areas we'll export. So we're lots of conversations happening across Mediterranean Europe, Chile, and Australia, and Canada.
So, I mean, it sounds like you can deploy the technology pretty, like, in terms of you're not the ones that are actually doing the kind of execution of the managing the forest, right? Or the restoration. So, yeah, in terms of your involvement with it, right? At what point do you hand over to them, or at what point are you working with them through their process?
Yeah, so our impact is we're cutting 5 to 10 years off of planning cycles where within minutes, um, group can actually come to consensus with more scientific information about the trade-offs of different types and intensities of treatment plans than they've been able to do on paper over years and years and years. And remember also that many of the kind of doing it the old way, often those processes end in litigation and then nothing happens because there's no trust between actors, there's not good data. And so we're transforming the space and enabling consensus to happen and trust to actually get to permit. So our benefit in the short term is deployment in many, many acres, cutting years off of and conflict out of these long, arduous planning processes. And then because of our technology, we can hand off plans to some of the emerging tech like earthforce.io and Kodama and some of the other companies that actually do the treatments. And also like some of the old school folks that have their machinery, we can hand them plans and they can program into their machines some of the mechanical thinning work. We can help with right up to the day prescribed fire planning. And then on the back end of treatments, we support monitoring. So that's one of the other things that hasn't been possible. And as we all know, storytelling, success begets more success, right? And so if we can help the Forest Service, BLM, parks, tribes with data-driven storytelling show and document that treatments worked and that we did actually reduce fire. So next time a fire hits an area that was treated and it goes to the ground and becomes a regenerative force, as we monitor and report on that and do storytelling on that over and over and over again across many acres, that will just cause more engagement, right? And more treatments to happen. And we can do long term, we do the treatment effects analysis. So how did we actually get the carbon benefit, the water benefit, the biodiversity benefit, and the reduced fire probability and severity that we forecasted in the scenario planning part of our tool? So we can actually report on those things and really, in many ways, put the value of nature on the table again, right? I mean, ultimately, the holy grail for me is part of why we're in this mess is humans have worked to control nature. We wiped out predator species because they were killing off our cattle, right? We have air conditioners because we want to control the temperature, and then we've been controlling fire, and we sort of controlled the future of forests, right, by cutting everything down and sort of screwing it up. And so, in many ways, it's really getting back to sort of the way tribes interact with nature. It's really kind of restoring that reciprocal ecocultural relationship with nature and really understanding how our interventions affect the life support systems, right? Like this treatment, how much more water is there because we did that, and really helping people understand those things.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, it really is. It's been a huge education, this. Tell me, what are the biggest challenges for you? Like from here now as a CEO of an early stage company, right? I mean, like how many people work at your company?
We have about 70
Okay.
people. And Yeah, we're a startup. We have the typical startup struggles. We had to burn more cash, so we're a venture funded company. Our the venture capital behind us are really impact focused. They're all focused on climate and nature tech and biodiversity. So they share the mission with us, but they expect venture returns. And we're dealing with transforming a bureaucratic, a series of bureaucratic, slow-moving, risk-averse entities, right? Because in the Western U.S., 60% of the land, 40 to 60%, depending on the state, is federal land, and a large portion is state land, right? And so um, that's long, slow transformation. Similar with utilities. Utilities are moving a little faster because there's so much risk facing them, but they're slow. It's like there's a lot of intent and goodwill, but the red tape can't keep up with the intent. And so, we're this really incredible team that's very rare of some of the top machine learning engineers in the world. I mean, my team pioneered machine learning at companies like Meta. I mean, machine learning was born to serve ads effectively, right? Like they pioneered that technology at companies like Meta. They didn't want to do that anymore. They wanted to use their talent to fix the climate. And so they joined Vibrant Planet to leverage their capabilities to map nature in the way that I described and to try to keep these places intact, ultimately for climate change, but also to keep biodiversity and water and all these other things intact. Our science team, we have some of the most incredible science leads for hydrology, biodiversity, mapping vegetation and future. What will vegetation look like in future climate scenarios? I mean, they're absolutely mind blowing. Some of the most talented fire modelers in the world. We acquired a company called Pyrologics last year, so we have this incredible team, and it's been a really expensive platform to build. We're sort of part applied AI, so you can think of us like an applied AI company that's doing cancer detection, right? So we're doing the equivalent of an AI-driven cancer detection system. We're detecting risk to communities and nature, just like the cancer example. But then we're also the what do you do about it team, and that's where we're also an applied science team. So we're applied AI and we're applied science to help people make better decisions with scientific information at hand. And then monitoring, the other part of the applied science is monitoring the effects and resilience trends. So building the company has been expensive. It's a really seasoned
Mm.
team, and the only way we could build a system that would actually solve the problem was to burn quite a bit of cash to build this really cool platform that we've built. We're now at a point where we're able to scale. Like we've deployed it across the Western U.S. We've developed the AI techniques that we can go global now. And we're just in this fight for our lives to make sure we have enough funding to make sure we can keep going and expand fast enough to actually matter, right? Because there's a lot of places outside of the US that a lot of ecosystems that we're going to lose in the next 10 years if we don't move faster. We can't get enough capital fast enough in the typical venture world with how much you raise burn revenue ratios with slow moving customers. To some days it's like, god damn it, are we going to make it? Other days it feels like, okay, here we go, we're skyrocketing, and it's just, it's classic startup roller coaster ride.
Sounds like it. It sounds awesome. You've done a wonderful job in getting the company to where it is. I love the vision, and thanks so much for coming on, to talk through it. And we'll be watching you closely and looking to support you along the way.
Thank you so much, Simon. Super fun conversation.
Yeah, no, great.
Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you, Alison. That was really good. Thank you.